So what I'm going to do in this video with you guys is demonstrate what it looks like to examine the elements of persuasion, not in an advertisement or in a persuasive text, but in an actual literary sense. So one of the dominant literary devices in Julius Caesar is persuasion. There are lots of people who have to get convinced to do something or argue back and forth as to what the right course of action might be. And this example here between Cassius and Brutus is basically the first one. Now, if you guys remember some of your background stuff, you should remember that Cassius is the sort of initial conspirator who tries to plan Julius Caesar's assassination, and he has to convince Brutus to join in. That's what this speech essentially is showing us right here. And so let me tell you a little bit about what goes on to actually make that happen. As you'll see, I'm going to be highlighting our elements of persuasion over here with different colors, and I'll also be trying to type alongside of it so that you guys can sort of see this is what I would want you to be able to do, both highlighting and explaining whenever you had to analyze one of these elements of persuasion in like a test or on like an assignment or something of that nature. So let's look here first. Cassius begins his speech to Brutus, "And 'tis very much lamented, Brutus, that you have no such mirrors as will turn your hidden worthiness to your eye, that you might see your shadow. I have heard where many of the best respect in Rome, except immortal Caesar, speaking of Brutus and groaning under this age's yoke, have wished that noble Brutus had his eyes." So in this one, he, as you can see sort of over here, is basically trying to pay Brutus a compliment. He's trying to talk about how so many people have been hoping that Brutus would step up and speak, against the difficulties, the bad things happening in this age. So I'm going to highlight this as pathos. I've heard where many of the best of respect in Rome, blah, 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 groaning under this, have wished that noble Brutus had his eyes. Now, this one right here, I think this is pathos, essentially because it's appealing to one of Brutus's emotion. That, most especially, his pride, or his sense of reputation. So, essentially, pathos, again, is trying to get the audience, your audience, to feel something specific around this. And this is basically what Cassius is trying to do right here. Now, likewise, you could also say that this might be a good example as well of ethos. Many with the best respect in Rome. Oh, now that's an ugly highlight color right there when it overlaps right there, but whatever. So the ethos of this is essentially trying to show that many authoritative, respectable people have this opinion. And obviously, ethos is all about getting people to trust. If these authoritative sources have this thought, then you should as well. So you can also see this is a good example of how these can overlap. You might be looking at one example and notice both pathos and ethos available in it. Or, we may even see logos available in all of these things. This is just a good place to start. So then Brutus, of course, asks, "What dangers would you lead me, Cassius?" He's skeptical. He doesn't want to just be persuaded out of nothing. Cassius then responds, "Therefore, good Brutus, be prepared to hear. Since you know you cannot see yourself, so as I do by your glass, modestly discover to yourself that which you do not yet know of. And be not jealous on me, gentle Brutus. Were I a common laugher, or did use to stale with ordinary oaths my love to every new protester, you know that I do fawn on men and hug them hard, and after scandal them, or if you know that I profess myself in banqueting to all the rout, then hold me dangerous." Essentially what he says right here, if I was just someone who you could not trust, if I was a fool, or if I made promises to everyone and broke them, or if I slandered people, my friends, behind their backs, then you would know not to trust me. Well, this is another good example of ethos, as Cassius basically applies it to himself. Yeah, okay, we're just going to vaguely try to color that in as best we can. This is harder to do without my Promethean board, guys. But essentially, this is a good example of ethos, simply because he tries to establish his trustworthiness as a speaker. Brutus can trust him and trust the opinion that he's about to give, because we know that, or as Cassius is trying to prove, he's not someone who does go around and do all this stuff. So, basically, this, another example of ethos right here. But now let's go into what happens next. There's a flourish, there's a shout. Brutus asks, what's this mean? I do fear the people choose Caesar for their king. Cassius notes, I, do you fear it? Then must I think you would not have it so. In this situation, Cassius is kind of reading what Brutus's reaction is. No one said anything so far about what they think of Caesar, but Brutus, rather logically, puts two and two together. He uses his reasoning that Brutus must fear Caesar becoming king. Therefore, he does not want it, and he might even do something to prevent it. And as we know from our historical background, that's basically what Cassius is doing, trying to recruit him into this conspiracy. Brutus, of course, responds that essentially, yes, I, may love Caesar personally, but the general good is more important. And so Cassius then goes on, I know that virtue to be well in you, Brutus, as well as I do know your outward favor. Well, honor is the subject of my story. I cannot tell what you and other men think of this life, but for my single self, I had as lief not be as live to be in awe of such a thing as I myself. I was born free as Caesar, so were you. We've both fed as well, we both endure the winter cold as well as he, but once upon a raw and gusty day, etc., etc. We'll get into that story in one moment. Essentially, the point, though, that he makes right here is that I was born as free as Caesar, and I would not be in awe of such a thing as myself. So he's essentially making a reasonable conclusion right here. He does not want to worship or bow down to something that he should be equal to. And he continues to give some more evidence of that reasoning right here. I was born free as Caesar, so were you. So this is his reasoning or his conclusion that he comes to. And then he actually gives us a good example of this. We both can endure the winter's cold as well as he. Once upon a raw and gusty day, the troubled Tiber chafing with her shores, Caesar said to me, Darest thou, Cassius, now leap with me into this angry flood and swim to yonder point? On the word, accoutred as I was, I plunged in and bade him follow. So indeed he did. The torrent roared, we did buffet it with lusty sinews, throwing it aside, stemming it with the heart's controversy. But ere we could arrive at the point proposed, Caesar cried, Help me, Cassius, or I sink. And I, as Aeneas, our great ancestor, did from the flames of Troy upon his shoulder the old Anchises bear, so from the waves of Tiber did I the tired Caesar. So he essentially, as you can see over here, challenges, or rather Caesar challenges him to a swimming match one day when they're younger. They jump in, and Caesar ends up almost drowning. Cassius has to actually rescue him. So he's using this entire point right here, this whole story more or less, as a way of making us think about why Caesar should be held up as a god or as a king. He's again trying to make this same point of reasoning, this time just by providing evidence. Caesar is not a basically particularly special person. We'll say he is weak, almost drowned. He needed Cassius to save him. And so it was also seemingly pretty reasonable for Cassius to say, this makes no sense for me to have to worship someone who is basically not even necessarily my equal, but someone who I can even better in a simple situation like this. Now, likewise, you could easily look at some of these things again as well and talk about how Cassius is also trying to appeal to other senses of that Brutus would also perhaps share. So if we were to talk about the ways that he is trying to get us riled up, trying to appeal to our passion, our pathos, this man has now become a god, and Cassius is a wretched creature and must bend his body, is Caesarly but not on him. So this situation right here, he's trying to appeal to our sense of dignity. He's basically saying, hey, we're supposed to be equals, and yet, look, I'm a wretched creature, I must bend my body, I must bow to Caesar if he but looks at me. And that sort of feeling of, that's against my pride, that's appealing to my pride, that's appealing to my sense of dignity, is also meant to be persuasive to Brutus as well. There's other further evidence in here. He had a fever when he was in Spain, and when he fit was on him. I did mark how he did shake. 'Tis true, this god did shake. Again, he's essentially giving us an example, some evidence of his physical weakness that we can again see as a marker that he does not deserve any particular reverence above all of their equals. So these different elements so far have been pretty persuasive, and several of the other aspects in here again we could relook at them to find even further examples, more ethos, more logos, more pathos. It's all up and down in here. So these are going to be kind of the things that I'm going to ask you guys to do as you go through and analyze this stuff. You'll be again looking after the examples first to identify logos, ethos, or pathos, and then you'll make sure that you explain them. And again, just remember how you're explaining each of these. Logos, again, you would be talking about evidence, reasoning, or conclusions. Ethos, you would have to talk about authority, sources, expert sources, or trustworthiness. And pathos, you have to talk about the author's emotion or the appeal to the reader's emotion. So those are going to be your basic things that you have to look out for. I'll leave this page up here, but also make sure that you review this video so that you can kind of understand what you're going to be doing in your next exercise.